Hey everyone, my name is Trip Charbs. I am from Pine Creek First Nation, Minigozibia, Anishinaabe. I am an international selling artist and designer. I've been working with Manitoba Muckluck's Storyboot project going on about 6 years now. And today we are going to teach you how to make moccasins, but first we're going to start with the pattern. So you may have already traced your foot on the paper. You do not have to cut it out. We're just doing the tracing for the sole purpose of getting the measurements. So we're gonna measure from the tallest toe, which is either the toe next door or the big toe. So in this case here, we are 10 inches. So this is the longest from heel to toe. We are at 10 inches. And then the widest part we are just over 4, so we're just going to give the extra room and say we're at 4 inches. So this part is so now that we have our measurements, we're going to start with making a pattern. Something thick, a cardstock will be nice. And then you're going to want to take the longest part and fold it in half. So what we're doing here is we're taking the measurement of the widest part of the foot and we're working in halves. So that when we make our pattern and open up the other half, we've perfectly mimicked the other side. So we're working down the center line, the folded center line here. This is where we're going to start marking our pattern. So I'm adding an inch. And then the 10 inches. And another inch at the toe, a total of 12 inches. So if your foot measures 10 inches, your pattern is going to be 12 inches long from here to toe. So to get the width of our foot, that's what we did the measurements in 4 inches here. We're going to divide that in half and we're going to put 2 inches. Mark our 2 inches. And then we're also going to add an inch and a half this way. So from that 2 inches, add an extra inch and a half for a total of 3.5 inches. And then we're just going to draw a line. So this is your heel area. We're going to add an inch here. This little mark here is going to create our ankle heel area, which we will show you in a second. Up here you'll just want to give yourself a nice rounded edge connecting to the line we have over here. This is the toe area where we're going to create our puckers. So if you open that up, you're going to have a blank side on this side, but when we cut this out, it'll perfectly mimic on the other side. So let's cut that out. You will be getting most likely this pair of red scissors, which is leather scissors, fabric scissors only. So you'll want to make sure that you have an extra pair of paper scissors nearby. So let's go ahead and cut out this pattern. Remember, we marked this little inch here, so let's just cut that 1 inch slit first. Just up to the line. You could fold it if you wanna. And then let's cut our pattern out here. You'll want to save the scrap piece of paper to make our vamps afterward. So now we have our pattern. If you open it up, you'll have your sole part of the moccasin. So your foot should fit nicely within this parameter here. Let's go on and get a visual. So here we have that 1 inch at the bottom and the 1 inch at the top. Why we folded the paper in half, because it's easier to get this perfect arch by having it folded in half versus trying to mimic that if we didn't have this fold. These folds are important as well because we're going to mark the center when we're marking our leather. So now we got the sole. To figure out how much we need for our vamp, we're gonna fold this in half. So you're just gonna go right to the end. So this measurement, this half measurement here is gonna tell us how long our vamp needs to be. We're gonna measure from an inch down. So we're gonna mark an inch. So from this mark down to this folded half is how long our vamp is gonna be. So that's 5 inches. So the same way we worked in halves here with the sole, we're gonna do the same thing to make the vamp. We're gonna fold the piece of paper in half. Again, we'll do the long. You want to make sure you have a nice flat bottom here, so I'm just gonna give a nice straight line. Normally I would have folded the creases to line up perfectly, but I kind of folded that quickly there. So again, we measured, it was 5 inches. So let's mark 5 inches. And then remember, we measured the width of the foot was 4 inches. So we're working in halves. So we're gonna do 2 inches here. And then you'll just want to round out the toe. You know, if your arch, you could go a little extra, and then if you're not happy with the arch, you could always cut a little extra off. So let's see how this arch looks. So we're a little jagged, so we could always cut off the excess just to make it nice. And there we have a vamp. So as you can see, the vamp is under the inch up to the fold line. So we have a sole and we have a vamp. That's your basic pattern for a moccasin. So like the same way we made a pattern for an adult pair of moccasins, you might want to make a pattern for a toddler pair. So the way we measured from heel to toe, you're going to do the same thing with a toddler's pair. From heel to toe here, this is a 4-inch length and the width is at 2 inches. So the way we made our pattern in halves, the sole and the vamp, it's the same thing for a toddler. We're going to add an inch to the bottom, an inch to the toe, and an inch and a half to the width of your toddler's foot. So if we were to mark, the width of the toddler's foot was 2 inches, so we did a 1-inch mark and then we added the 1.5, mark them, cut them out, and your toddler's foot should fit perfectly inside there. So these measurements that we've given you by adding the 1 inch to the heel and 1 inch to the toe and the 1.5 to each side of your foot is a universal pattern for any size foot. All your family would have to do is send you the measurement from heel to toe and the widest part, and you could make any kind of pattern for their moccasins. So now that we've explained that, let's get on to some construction. Let's get on to tracing our pattern onto the leather. So you'll have about 4 to 6 square feet of leather in your kits. To check which way is head to and rib to rib, you'll want to give your leather a little tug. The stretchier pull is rib to rib, and if it's tighter, it's head to pardon my language. So you'll want to you'll flip one side of your leather is going to be more fancier than the other side. So we're going to call one side rough and we're going to call one side smooth. So here we could see a smoother side, and here we have a rough side. So we're going to trace our pattern on the rough side. It's up to you if you want to go head to toe or rib to rib, but you'll want to make sure that you'll trace. If you go this way, you're going to want to make sure that both of your soles are this way and your vamps. So you do not want to cut one sole this way and one sole this way, or your vamps this way. You want to keep everything in line. But if you can't, if you could only do your sole and sole, you can do your vamps both the same direction. You'll also, when you're doing your leather, you don't want to leave a seam allowance between your patterns. We can share the seam line because the leather doesn't fray when you sew, so your patterns could be right butt up against one another. Before we get on to tracing our pattern, you're most likely going to have a straight edge cut on your leather. We're going to cut two 1 inch wide at about 14 to 15 inches long. So on your straight edge, mark 1 inches. Let's go ahead and do that. You'll want to get a nice marker or a good pen. Something that doesn't bleed. If you use a washable marker, it's going to bleed when you sew. The permanent marker doesn't really bleed when you're rubbing the leather. Okay, so we're going to make two of these at about 14 to 15 inches long. Let's just say I made two of them. And then you're going to go ahead and start tracing your pattern. So this is one sole, left or right. So you remember these little folds we have here? You're going to go ahead and want to make a mark here. And then the center fold, remember we said we're going to do a little mark on the tip here. And where we folded it back in the half, we're going to do some corner marks here. This is where we will pin off and start with our vamps. So there's one. Let's flip it over and do another one. So now that we have traced our pattern on the leather, like I mentioned earlier, you want to share your seam allowance because the leather doesn't fray. So we would have traced on the leather and on the lining. Same thing, you could share your seam allowance. You don't have to, because the lining doesn't fray as well. So like we made on the leather, the 1 inch strip at 15 to 16 inches. You do not need one for the lining. This strip is for the sole purpose of creating this decorative fold over lip on the pucker moccasin. So we are using white for our decorative strip just for visual in the video, and I'll be using black sinew just for visual. Your kit will come with the proper colors so that they blend in nicely. So let's cut these out. Okay, so we've cut out our sole, we've cut out our vamps, and we've cut out our liners. So we have these little markings on the heel area. On the lining, we could go ahead and cut these right off. We do not need them on the liner. You do not necessarily need to keep it on your leather sole. If you happen to cut it off the way you've done there, that's fine. But we're just gonna leave the little tongue flap for now, and we're gonna be cutting that off after anyways. So if you cut it off, no biggie. So this is what we are gonna be going for with our liner. As you can see here, the stitches aren't very perfect, but you won't see those anyways. Let's get started. So we are gonna pin our vamp. Like the markings, we have the half markings we've marked also on our liners. So this is where we're gonna start off. We're gonna put a pin on this corner, these two corners together, and then we're gonna pin the other corner. I'll show you how. So you're not gonna get the whole roll in your kit, but you're gonna get some sinew. Oh, who knows how long. But this one piece of sinew is gonna give you 5 single pieces, 4 to 5 single pieces, depending on how much is in here. So in order to find that out, you're just gonna wanna kind of start pulling it apart. So we found one. And then you kind of just wanna put your fingers in between and give her a nice, just to separate. So there's one thread. And then as you can see, it's starting to fray into a few more pieces. You could tie both ends together if you want a double strand. I like to use a single strand and just tie the one knot. It's purely preference. So you'll get 2 types of needles in your kit. I'm using the Glover's needle right now. You'll get a beading needle. So the Glover's needles are a little thicker and you might not want to stab yourself with those. So to get started on our liner, we're going to put fluffy side to fluffy side, and we are going to find this corner here. We're going to go about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and then we'll do the corner here. Do a double wrap. This is our starting points. We're going to just tack it down and tie it off. I just do a little nick here, and then I do a double. So that's one. So again, we're going to do the other side. We're coming in just about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And it's about the same on this side. I'm doing twice. And then for a knot, I'm just kind of nicking a little piece of the lining here. And then just a basic, I'm doing a double loop. And then you just give her a tug, and there you go. Now that we have our 2 ends pinned, we're going to start from the center of our toes. And this is going to give us the toe pucker. So on the Vamp, you might want to, if you're comfortable doing markings, you're more than welcome to mark on the liner and on the leather, because when we're going to sew the leather, we won't see these dots afterwards. So on the Vamp, you're going to want to stay about 1/4 of an inch spacing between each. And you'll have about 8 to 9 puckers on each side. It doesn't matter if you have 8 on one side and 7 on the other. And we're not going to use all of these. So that's the Vamp, 1/4 inch apart. Sole part, we're going to go about 1/2 an inch apart. We're staying about 1/4 inch seam allowance in. So this is just a give or take at 1/2 an inch visually. And we're just going to connect the dots. So we're going to start with the center points. You could work left to right, whatever direction you want to start with. So I like to start from the bottom of the sole and come up through the center part. And we're doing a wrap stitch. We're going to do this twice through the puckers. You'll always want to do twice. If you only do once, your seams are going to slide. This way, when you do a two wrap, it will hold the seam together nicely. So there's one, and there's 2. So now we're going to connect our first dots. I'm going to go into the back one here. That's at 1/2 an inch, As you can see, that's the sole, and I'm connecting it to the first dot in front on the Vamp, which is set at 1/4 of an inch. Remember, we're going to do 2, so this is called the wrap stitch or the whip stitch. I'm sure everyone has different names for it. So that's 2. Again, connecting the dots. This doesn't have to be visually pretty, it's practice, but you just want to keep consistency with your puckers. So after the first 2, you could kind of see we're creating the little pucker here. So like I said, the dots at the back were purely a visual reference. I'm kind of not really following my dots, but I'm still going at a 1/2 inch width at the back on the sole and keeping 1/4 of an inch on the Vamp. So like I said, you'll get about between 6 to 8, maybe 9 puckers on each side. You're just wanting to do it until you get rid of all the excess here. So you'll want to check and make sure when this runs flat. So you can see we have a little excess there. We're going to get 1 more pucker out of that. Okay, so now that we've got rid of all this excess, we've got a nice pucker here on our left side. This is flat. We're just going to do a running stitch. Our running stitch is just in and out. We're done with the whip stitch. So the whip stitch was going over and over. We're just going in and out here now. I'm still keeping at about 1/4 of an inch. You could give it a little tug, not too tight. If you pull it too tight, you're gonna pull that all. You'll just want to pull that right back out again so that we're keeping it nice and flat. So once you get to your tacks, we're gonna do a wrap stitch. Go do a whip or a wrap and tie it off. Again, we're just nicking the fabric. Okay, so we did the left side. Got a nice little pucker here. Now we're gonna do the right side. I still like to come from the bottom, but now instead of going this way, I'm gonna turn it towards me a little. Everybody has their own preference of the way they like to hold while sewing. So again, we're doing 1/2 inch at the back and we're connecting to 1/4 of an inch in front. We're doing the whip stitch again here just to create the puckers. Okay, so we're gonna sew up our heel here. These nice pieces here. We're gonna, this is the heel area and this is the ankle area. So we're gonna sew from heel to ankle because you could always trim this little excess off if you have too much on the one end once we get there. It's better to have the excess sitting on the ankle area to trim it off versus it sitting on the heel area, and then you'd have it lopsided and you'd have to take it apart, do it over. So let's sew it up from the bottom. Again, 1/4 of an inch. We're going to do a wrap to start it off just to secure it, and then we're going to do a running stitch. Again, I'm keeping at 1/4 of an inch distance and 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Reach the end, do a wrap stitch and tie it off. And then we'll sew up this one. We're just going to put it flat and then sew it from one side to the other. Wrap stitch to start. And a wrap stitch to finish. Let's say I tie it, and then there's your slipper. You may want to slip that on just to make sure that it fits. If it's a little too big, you may be able to go a little smaller, but it's better to be snug because it will stretch. Do not wear them around once you've tried them on, because you will outstretch them, and then come time to put them inside of your leather, your lining will be outstretched and won't fit inside the leather. Okay, so let's get started with a simple beadwork tutorial. I am going to show you how to create a simple diamond pattern, which you can then expand to a double or even triples and so forth. So you'll start by drawing your, so this would be the rough side of the vamp, and then this would be the nice side. So you would want to go ahead and mark. Usually you keep 1 inch from your toe and 1 inch from the ankle area, because this is where your fur will sit, and then your toe. But you're more than welcome to bead your entire vamp. Just leave 1/4 of an inch seam allowance around the edges. I am going to be using slightly larger beads just for the viewing purpose, and I'm going to be using black thread on some pellin. You'll be getting some melton wool in your kits. You're more than welcome to bead on these for your vamps or directly on your leather. I'm just using this piece of pellin just for the example of showing you how to create a simple diamond pattern. So let's go ahead and get started. You'll have the smaller seed beads in your package to create a smaller beading pattern. So I have a line on the back, and I'm just going to go ahead and start at the bottom of my line here. So I'm starting with the light blue here. In my case, I'll be using black. Okay, so I'm using a leather needle just for the purpose, because it's larger for you to see, and I'm using a little bit bigger beads. These are the beading needles that you'll be getting in your kits, and you'll also be getting some large Glover needles, which are for the leather. So let's get on with our beading here. So I have my line on the back of my pellin here, and I'm starting at the bottom or the top. I'm going to throw on 3 beads. You could use 3 to 4, and then I'm going to lay them flat, and I'm tacking it down directly in front. You'll want to make sure you're coming up on the line underneath, and then you're just going to pull that down. They may stick up a little, and then you're coming up through that same hole the hole you started with, and we're going to go through those 3 beads and add our next 3. So we've added the next 3, and again I'm going to tack it down, make sure that we're on the line underneath. I'm not coming up at the beginning, but I'm coming up at the beginning of the purple. And I'm going to go through the purple. Just give it a little tug and it'll tighten up. So now I'm working on the center of my diamond. Which will be clear. And I'm coming up at the beginning of my clear, and I'll go through the 3 clear. So I'm going to I'm repeating this on each side of the diamond as well. While this, I'm still continuing the center line of my diamond. Now I'm going to do purple. And now we'll finish off with black, and then we'll jump up next door and create one side of our diamond. So we finished our center line. Now we're just going to jump up next door here slightly, next door to the purple. You don't want to come too close. If you're too close, your beads are going to be pushing over. So you kind of want to guesstimate where the center of your bead is going to... I'd say that looks good. And then we're going to put black. Come up through at the beginning of those 3 black, and we'll go through and we'll add 3 purple. So we're finishing off the second row, and the same way we jumped up next door to the purple, we're going to do the same thing right here and finish off our one side of the diamond. And there you have it. You'll just repeat the same steps on this side to get the other half of your diamond. And once you've mastered that, you'll be able to create yourself any kind of starburst designs. Happy beading. So a quick tip, if you're finding your beads aren't laying as flat as you would like them to, you can tack down in between each bead by coming up on the inside, going over and tacking down on this side. Let's show you. So you could see I'm coming up in the seam of the bead. I'm gonna go down on the other side. And then you could kind of see there's a loop. It's gonna go down in between each bead, and it's gonna pull that thread down, and it's gonna lay it a little flatter. Let's do the next one. See the loop, and we're gonna pull it down. Now they're nice and flat. If you want to do that to all of your beads, you are more than welcome to. This type of tacking will also help you create some nice curves when you need. You just tack down in between every two or every single bead. So now that we did our lining, like I said, the construction is going to be exactly the same way. You could work from left to right. The only difference is now we are working with this decorative strip. You will be using the same colored leather. I'm just using the white strip for visual purposes, and I will be using black sinew as well, just for visual purposes. And some of you may have the option in your kits. It comes with the melted wool. If you don't want to bead on the leather, you're more than welcome to bead on the melted wool. An example here would be one of the previous Storyboot artisans, Rhonda, who beads her wraps with the melted wool. She just double layers it and uses it as an accent. So let's get on with that. We are doing rough side leather to rough side. So as you could see our markings. We are again going to start with these 2 points. We're going to tack, and we're going to start with this here shortly. So let's pin these areas. Double wrap pin, 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. You might also want to have yourself a needle nose pliers. Because you're going to be sewing through 3 layers of leather, and sometimes this leather is really tough. It'll be your best friend by the time you're done. So let's do a pin. I just put a single knot there. Okay, so this is where our decorative strip comes in. Now a lot of you may have seen the reverse flip moccasin. We ain't doing no reverse flipping or turning inside out here. You're gonna want to find your softer side of your leather, because you'll have the brown, and then you'll want to put your rough side facing up. So nice side facing the vamp, and your middle point, center. Let me just mark that for visual. So I'm folding this in half. And on the rough side, I'm just going to put a little mark for my center. And that's where I am starting with all 3 of these. Here we go. Line up your points. Quarter-inch seam allowance. So this decorative piece is going to stay flat with your vamp at all times. The only part that's getting puckered is the sole part of your leather. We're going to do twice. So you're gonna try and keep your needle pretty consistent in the same holes, just so you have a nice stitch on your leather. The liner was practice, but here we're gonna keep them nice. So just for visualness, I'm gonna show you that we're doing 1/4 of an inch on the Vamp. So this is gonna stay flat with the Vamp, 1/4 inch, and we are doing 1/2 inch at the back. That's the first wrap. Let's do it again. So once you go through the 3 layers, if you kind of wiggle your needle around a little, it'll make the hole a little more easier to slide through the next second round. So our first 2 puckers, as you see, we're keeping the decorative strip flat with the Vamp. So I prefer to use the needle nose pliers when I'm sewing. Some may like to use a rubber thimble or a metal thimble, or you could even make a homemade thimble out of the scrap leather. So here we're doing the running stitch. I did the puckers already. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 puckers. Like I said, you'll have anywhere from 6 to 8, sometimes 9 on one side. And we just did that until all of this excess lip over here was gone. So remember we were mentioning you would want to check until your seam runs straight. This is what we're puckering. You do not want to pucker all the way to the end here, because then you'll have to take those stitches out, then you'll have one lopsided moccasin. So we're gonna continue this running stitch all the way to the end here. Then once you get to the end here, you're gonna do a double wrap stitch, tie it off, and you could trim this excess off. So when you're done that, and we get all the way around here, with the magic of television, we would end up with this. So here you could kind of see with the white sinew, we did the running stitch and we have our puckers. So now that we've done on both sides, I am going to show you how now to tack down this decorative strip on finishing off my right side. Now let's get started. Okay, so now that we've sewn on both sides, let's tack this decorative strip down. So I like to come in through one of the puckers. So I've already done this side, so I came up from my center pucker is here. Let's go through the one next door. So I'm coming down through my pucker about 1/4 of an inch. And then you see my knot was hidden with inside the pucker. So we're just gonna see how much of this comes down. And you could kind of see I have some holes here because I've sewn this down already before in a demonstration. So you can see I'm about 1/4 of an inch up, or just enough for it to lay down. So let's go ahead and tack those down. I'm using black sinew again, just for visual representation. You will have brown or a white. So I'm just going to go down through the same hole in the pucker that I came up through. One, because it's easier, and I'm coming up through the pucker next door, 1/4 of an inch down. And you can see that little loop is just going to hold that leather down nicely. And we'll continue on next door. And then we're going to go through the same hole on the pucker, come up on the pucker next door. So you can see I'm about 1/4 inch down. And then that loop is going to hold this piece of leather down nicely. And then we're going to do that all the way. Okay, so you should have tacked down your decorative strip down on all of your puckers. And once you've gotten to your last one, it's just the same thing. We're still going to do jump over next door about a 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch over. Just there's no pucker there now. It's just a flat running stitch area. So the loop is still the same. Bring her down. Grab your decorative strip and go through that same hole again. Come up slightly next door. And we'll continue that process all the way down to the end here. You would have a little bit of excess here. You would have already went ahead and snipped off the excess strip, and we are left with just this little lip over the vamp. You're going to go ahead and pin that down through on the inside. So as you can see, your stitches right there next door. I'm just going to go underneath, kind of just to catch it a little, to give me a lever, and do 2 of these. And we tied a knot. And there you have it. So next we're going to sew up this heel part. Okay, so just for visual purposes, we have this black piece of leather in between our 2 pieces. So why that is there is for strength and to hide the threads. So when you're sewing 2 pieces of leather together, you'll always want to sandwich a piece of leather in between them. In your case, you'll have the same color piece of leather sandwiched in between like so. And then again, we're sewing from the heel to the ankle area. Wrap stitch, running stitch. And then there'll be some sticking out there. You're just gonna push your finger out like so, and you'll have a little more extra there, and just trim it right off. Now we're gonna sew this piece here. So why we didn't cut this piece off is it's acting as the middle piece. If you happen to cut that off, that's fine. You're just gonna wanna stick that little piece out. If you've cut that piece out, then you'll just wanna kinda eyeball a piece of leather, and we'll just kind of say we cut it off. We're just gonna go ahead and stick it back in there, and we would sew it up. But in our case, we didn't cut it off, so it's there. Now let's sew that shut. Again, we're gonna start with a wrap stitch, and then we'll do a running stitch. So when I get to this little area, I kind of like to do a little wrap stitch around it, just for a little extra So I'm doing kind of a wrap stitch around it. You don't necessarily have to. It's just a personal preference. Kind of pulls that seam a little tighter. And then let's carry on with our wrap stitch, running stitch down to the other end. Wrap stitch to finish it off. And then we're gonna push this back on the right side. So see, there's that little flap we left. Now we could cut it off. And there you'll have it. And then now we're gonna check and make sure our liner fits nicely inside. And then we'll move on to the fur. There you go. So now that we have our liner inside of our leather, let's measure for the fur. To figure out the fur, we're gonna measure the width of our vamp, which we already know is 4 inches. And then we're gonna squeeze our moccasin at the heel, pinch it, and squeeze these 2 corners together. And we're gonna measure that. And so that goes right around. This measurement we're gonna double. So that's 5.5 inches. So around to the other corner would make it 11 inches plus the 4 would make a total of 15 inches circumference. So that is the measurement of our ankle hole. That's how long of a fur strip we're gonna need by 2 inches. So let's cut out our fur. So you'll have your 2 strips, and your strip will be a little longer than what you're needed, but we measured we need a 15-inch strip. So you're gonna go ahead and sew these 2 ends together like I did here with this piece. I just did a running stitch, wrap stitch at each corner. And as you can see, the fur grain is at the bottom. So we flipped it right side out. And again, make sure your fur grain is at the bottom. You could tell by this very faint strip at the bottom. And you could also tell because the fluffiness is at the bottom. So you'll want to keep the fur against the fluff of your lining. And you're gonna start at your heel corner. I'm gonna do a wrap stitch just to start, and then I'm gonna do a running stitch all the way around. So let's go ahead and start off right here. So you want to make sure that you're sewing your lining, your leather, and your fur all together. Let's trim some of this fluff away for some visual. So this is gonna go ahead and sit inside there just to make it look a little cleaner. So I just did a wrap stitch just to secure it, and then I'm going to do a running stitch now. So as you can see, we just continued our running stitch all the way to the end. I happen to do a wrap stitch here. If you want to do a wrap stitch and that's what you're comfortable with, then you're more than welcome to do the stitch you are comfortable with doing. And as you get to the corners of the vamps, we just continued the same thing and kept our fur flat. Again, the grain of the fur is going downwards. So we've continued all the way to the end. We're just going to do a simple wrap stitch and tie it off. Do a quick knot. And guess what? You just finished your first pair of moccasins, and we're going to flip this fur back on out. And that's it. If you want to put a tack here, pin it to the leather, pin it to the leather. Otherwise, there's no need. Your fur won't roll over. But if you do get cold ankles, you could just flip that fur up on a cold day. So this is the raw suede. You could get yourself a leather protector, waterproofer if you want, and wear them outdoors. I don't have any leather protector on mine, but I wear mine out camping all the time, and if they get muddy, I just toss them in the wash and I let them air dry. So you don't want to throw your moccasin in the dryer, but tossing it in the washer will give it a little tightening again, and you'll stretch it out again and wear it out, then they'll be good as new. So first you'll want to find the direction of the rabbit fur. As you can see, the grain is going this way, and then this is up. So this would be the butt of the rabbit, this would be the head of the rabbit. Okay, so let's get a straight line here. As you can see, this is the bottom of our fur. So I'm just going to cut this jagged line off for now, and I am going to go about here. So that's 12. I need a 15-inch strip. And we're gonna do, we'll do 2 inches. You could do a 2.5, or you could do a 3-inch. The more inches would just give you a fluffier roll, a fluffier ankle. I'm just going to go all the way because I'm going to use this other end of fur as an example with the scissors on how not to cut your fur. So you'll want an X-Acto knife, a really nice sharp X-Acto knife when you're cutting your fur. And you'll want to have the fur elevated. and we're just gonna follow the line. So you just want to give yourself a little, and the knife is so sharp, so you just want to I kind of use my pinky and keep it here, and I kind of use it as a guide, and then you just want to gently follow your line. Why we're using the X-Acto knife is because we want to keep this grain of the fur. If we would have used the scissors, we would have cut this fluff right off, which I am going to show you shortly. So this example is just for you if you were to buy your own fur, a full fur, or a rabbit, a small single rabbit, and to sew your strips together. A lot of places where you would be buying your supplies already supply the strip for moccasins if you do not want to buy and cut your own. So as you can see here, I'm not dragging the knife right along the table. One, you don't want to cut the table or scratch it. And if you were to drag it flat, you would be cutting all that fur off. So here's my 15 inches. So I'm still gonna cut these two strips, this bottom piece off, and then these two strips here are what I'm gonna use. But an example would be, you do not want to use your scissors and cut like such, because look at all that fur you've just cut off now, and the mess you've made. And now this piece of fur is still usable in other ways, but you wouldn't really want to use that on your moccasins because you don't get that fluff. We've just cut off all the bottom grain, so we don't want any of that. That is why we are using the X-Acto knife. Again, I'm not dragging it on the table, I'm lifting the fur up just gently. So see, if we would have used the scissors, we would have cut all of that bottom grain off.